The Valentine's Day gift. When I was 24 years old, I worked in a monotonous office job in a small town and dreamed of something more exciting in life. That's when I met Beth, a shy and lonely young woman who was also trying to escape the suffocating routine. We met by chance when she commented on one of my Instagram posts. After chatting for a week, we finally decided to meet in person. At first, it seemed like the perfect start to a romance, but soon I discovered that her past hid dark secrets. I never imagined that simple comment could trigger such a series of frightening events, Beth once told me while trying to explain her situation. The main setting of our story is Beth's house, located on a quiet street surrounded by tall trees that blocked any view from the neighbors. The house, though simple, had a sinister air at night, with shadows projected by thin curtains and the constant sound of wind blowing between the branches. At first, everything seemed normal. We went out together, talked about our dreams and fears, and I felt increasingly connected to her. But a few weeks before Valentine's Day, Beth confided something disturbing. There was a man named Brandon who had been stalking her for months. He was a few years older, studied at the same college as her, and started following her around campus after meeting during a group project. She ignored his messages, but he kept insisting, especially as Valentine's Day approached. One day, she found a box of chocolates on her doorstep. Inside, there was a note. "I hope you like the gift." Beth knew it was from Brandon. She decided to confront him with a long message, saying he needed help and that she was seeing someone now. I did my best to reassure her, promising that I wouldn't let anything happen. But the situation worsened. Days later, I received a disturbing message from an unknown number. "Is she with you, isn't she?" It was the first time my name was mentioned, and it made me feel directly threatened. Brandon wasn't just persistent, he seemed obsessed, as if he were trying to sabotage any chance of happiness Beth might have. On Valentine's Day, we went out to dinner at a restaurant by the water. While eating, we noticed a man sitting on a bench outside, with a hat partially covering his face. When we looked in his direction, he tilted his head slightly and disappeared. Seconds later, we weren't laughing anymore. Later, at Beth's house, we heard a noise coming from the backyard. I went to check and found a pile of beach chairs knocked over, as if someone had tripped over them. Investigating further, I spotted a tall figure in the shadows. When I screamed, the man ran toward me. I managed to pin him down until Beth called the police. While waiting, I noticed something strange. The man carried an old photo of Beth in his wallet. It was as if he had been collecting moments of her, feeding his obsession in a sick way. When I asked why he was doing this, he muttered something about protecting her from herself. Brandon was arrested for trespassing and harassment. Beth got a restraining order against him, but something still bothers me to this day. Every time I think about that night, I feel like we're being watched. Did we really put an end to it? Reflecting on everything, I realized that Brandon wasn't just a stalker. He was a deeply disturbed person, unable to accept boundaries or understand the impact of his actions. And even with him behind bars, I still wonder, did we truly escape his control? Or is he still out there, waiting for the right moment to return? The dark encounter. When I was 27 years old, I decided to give online dating apps a try. I had always been shy and reserved, especially after a long relationship that ended badly. But something inside me said it was time to try something new. That's how I met Lena, a woman who seemed perfect on paper. She had piercing green eyes, wavy brown hair, and a smile that seemed genuine in her photos. We exchanged messages for a few days before scheduling our first date. At first, I thought it would just be another ordinary night, until I realized there was something wrong. I never imagined that meeting would change my view on relationships forever. Paul, my roommate, told me when I shared my plans with him. He didn't know how right he was. The setting of our date was a small, dimly lit restaurant in the city center, known for its intimate atmosphere and exquisite dishes. Lena suggested the location, and I immediately agreed, eager to impress her. When I arrived, she was already seated at a table near the window, with a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. She smiled when she saw me, but something in her gaze made me uncomfortable. We talked about trivial topics at first: work, hobbies, favorite movies. But then she started asking strange questions. "Have you ever thought about dying alone?" The question came out of nowhere, and I nervously laughed, thinking it was a joke. But she didn't laugh. Her eyes remained fixed on mine, as if trying to uncover something. After dinner, I suggested we take a walk to the nearby beach. It was a cold night, and the sound of waves crashing against the wet sand created a sinister atmosphere. Lena walked slowly, her high heels echoing in the silence. She stopped abruptly and asked, "Do you think you deserve to be happy?" I froze. "Why are you asking me this?" My voice trembled. She didn't answer, just kept walking. I tried calling Paul, who insisted I leave immediately. "Get out of there now, something isn't right." At that moment, I decided to follow Paul's advice and called a taxi. While waiting, Lena began acting even stranger. She muttered disjointed phrases like, "They're coming to get me," and "You shouldn't be here." When the taxi arrived, she grabbed my arm forcefully, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't go," she whispered, her voice filled with desperation. I gently pushed her away and got into the car, but I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror as she stayed behind, screaming something unintelligible. The driver noticed my discomfort and commented, "That woman doesn't seem well, man. You did the right thing." On the way home, I noticed someone following us. A black car kept its distance but was always present. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows, but I still felt like I was being watched. At 3 a.m., I heard knocking on the door. Looking through the peephole, I saw Lena, soaked from the rain, holding a bouquet of dead flowers. I ignored the knocks and called the police. They arrived quickly, but Lena had disappeared. Days later, I found out she had a history of unstable behavior and had been hospitalized several times. I never saw her again, but that night left deep marks on me. To this day, I avoid passing by the beach where we met. Some people simply aren't who they seem to be. The obscure wedding. When my wife and I got married in a small church in Miami, Florida, in 2017, we invited all our close friends and family, including those we didn't particularly like, because that's just what you're supposed to do. My wife, Allie, has an estranged aunt named Clara, who no one in her family is really close with. Aunt Clara used to have serious drug problems, which spiraled her down a path that led to a rift between her and the rest of the family. Surprisingly, Aunt Clara showed up to the wedding and brought a date. And unsurprisingly, he didn't look like the kind of guy you'd want to bring home to mom and dad. From the first moment I laid eyes on him, I knew he was different, not in a pleasant, quirky way. After the wedding ceremony came picture time. The 6 bridesmaids, 6 groomsmen, and my wife and I all went to a nice backyard section of the church campus to have pictures taken by the hired photographer. Some close family members came along to watch, while most others went to the party. Aunt Clara and her date Ron came to watch us take pictures. This was when I first learned his name. Ron and Aunt Clara were making everyone uncomfortable. Everyone in the bridal party would joke around and genuinely laugh, but either Chelsea or Ron would yell out weird, inappropriate things. They kept doing it to the point where they created awkward silences, and all of us were internally cringing, dreading what weird things they'd say next. It got very awkward, very quickly. Let's just say I wanted them to leave. Eventually, we finished taking pictures and moved to the party hall, where food and drinks were being served. Being the groom, all the attention was on me at all times. You barely have a chance to sit down and gather your thoughts, or even eat. Every second, someone else was coming up to congratulate me. Eventually, that person was Ron. He shook my hand, his breath terrible, his arms scarred up. He wasn't wearing a long-sleeved shirt, just a stained gray polo. He seemed like a filthy person all around. He started talking to me with this loud, almost demeaning tone. I did my best to be polite, and eventually, he walked back to Aunt Clara. That was the last time I saw him that day. Later, I saw Aunt Clara sitting by herself at a table, so I asked where Ron had gone. She had no idea. After a while of Aunt Clara sitting by herself, Allie went up to her to ask where her date was. Aunt Clara didn't know. She hadn't seen him in an hour. Allie grew concerned after hearing this and asked our parents and some close family members to look around for Ron to confirm if he was still there. There was concerning news when one of my relatives said that some of the gifts in the room where the gifts were stored were missing. We immediately attributed this to Ron and had an employee make an announcement over the microphone, asking everyone to keep an eye out for him. Aunt Clara wanted to call his cell phone, but couldn't find her phone. This put a slight damper on things, but we didn't let it ruin our wedding day. Our parents called the police and dealt with them on the side, with the help of Aunt Clara giving information about Ron. After the wedding reception, a few close friends came back to our hotel room for a little after party. Aunt Clara texted Allie asking for our home address because she had to drop off her gift that she forgot to give. Allie responded, and then our good time was interrupted by a distressing phone call from Aunt Clara's phone number. Allie turned off the music and put the call on speakerphone. There was heavy breathing on the other end, like something out of a horror movie. Allie kept asking where Aunt Clara was, but there was no response. Eventually, the person on the other end hung up. Allie called her grandma, who was the only one close enough with Aunt Clara to know where she would be, and she confirmed that Aunt Clara was staying with her for the night. Aunt Clara got on the phone and said she lost her phone at the wedding and didn't know her Apple ID or password, so she couldn't track it with Find My iPhone. Our best guess was that it was Ron who had the phone. We were now concerned that he knew our address and that we weren't home. We were too drunk to go home, so we asked my dad to stay there for the night and watch the house. He gladly did so. The next morning we woke up to texts and missed calls from my dad. He said someone kept hopping on different windows of the house, as if messing with him. He called the police, but they didn't find anyone. That same day, we went to the police station to see what could be done about pursuing Ron, who we suspected was behind all of this. But without video cameras catching the thief in the hall, and given that Aunt Clara's phone had been turned off or destroyed, there was little to nothing the police could do. Aunt Clara told us that she and Ron had gotten into a verbal argument and that he blamed us for whatever she was saying. He thought we didn't like him and, in his words, sabotaged him. This just further led us to believe he was responsible for that weird phone call and coming to our house in an attempt to scare or harass us. We never saw or heard from that Ron guy again, and we've only started to further distance ourselves from Aunt Clara after that. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay informed when the next video comes out. And tell me, what did you think of today's stories? See you in the next video.